If you think of a percentage of ebooks that get converted or recorded into audiobooks as sub 5%, and it's extremely low as you kind of look at the long tail of markets and geographies around the globe. And so the way I like to describe this product is really if a traditional audiobook is one voice that's recorded to read one book in one language, this is really any voice reading in any language and reading aloud any book that you want to be able to bring to life. We really want to bridge the two, which is telling great stories, but also pairing them with these iconic voices that you can only now get as a result of our technology. And hearing a story told in a voice that you might not have imagined before has been a pretty unique part of our growth at ElevenLabs.
Welcome to Subversive, a podcast dedicated to sharing stories from the best consumer subscription apps in the world. We'll bring you lessons for how to grow your consumer subscription business, including insights and inflection points that led to exponential growth from leaders at category-defining companies and innovative startups. Let's get into the show. This episode is brought to you by RevenueCat. The world's best apps use RevenueCat to power purchases, manage customer data, and grow revenue on iOS, Android, and the web. Join more than 100,000 apps that are already using RevenueCat to grow their businesses and track more than $10 billion in spend, including category leaders like OpenAI, Notion, and Ladder. Learn more at revenuecat.com/subversive. My guest today is Jack McDermott, who leads mobile growth at ElevenLabs. In this episode, I talked to Jack about the unique opportunities and challenges of building a consumer app like ElevenReader within a foundational model company, about the distribution strategies that ElevenReader has used to attract its early adopters, and about the first principles-based approach that Jack and his team have employed to optimize subscription pricing and packaging as AI is rapidly changing monetization strategies. All right, welcome, Jack, to Subversive. I'm excited to have you on today to talk about ElevenLabs and your consumer app that your team has been developing within ElevenLabs called ElevenReader. Before we get to that, though, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your professional background?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Phil. So I'm Jack. I lead mobile growth for ElevenLabs today and stumbled into tech. Story really began when I was younger and growing up, and still today with a stutter and beginning to move into tech because I sought to solve my own problems. So when I was in college, I started to build and launch my own mobile apps at the time. This was back in 2011, 2012. So the App Store was still relatively new, selling $29 one-time iOS apps at the time. This is well before IAPs and subscriptions. And I just really fell in love with the idea that you could build and craft and grow something that was so kind of innate for me, and then to be able to serve thousands of others that way. So that's really how I got into the tech space, and I stayed in kind of that ed tech sphere for the first part of my career. Was the first hire at a company called Panorama Education that builds software and analytics for school districts. I did that for about 5 years. I think they're about 400 employees or so today. Took a brief detour to go to business school, and then came back and worked at a startup in the ed tech space that was acquired by Chegg called Thinkful, which is a coding boot camp. And the idea there that brought me to Chegg was to take a big bet and to try to scale and grow a coding boot camp inside of Chegg. And this was the time of kind of income sharing agreements, and to build on top of Chegg's reach. So I led growth teams there as well, both on the B2C side and in some kind of unique B2B to C partnerships with platforms like Guild. So it was a wild ride, but that's really where I got my start.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you brought up your edtech background because I spent almost 4 years at Quizlet working with the growth team there. And so we have some common background. I'm curious to hear, obviously, Chegg is a company that has experienced a lot of disruption as a result of artificial intelligence. They're originally an offline textbook rental marketplace, but then they moved into online textbook solutions and other more advanced study modes. But then as ChatGPT and Claude and other LLMs have come along, that has created quite a bit of resistance for some of these edtech products that are catering to students, because students just go directly to the large LLMs now to get what they need. How has it been transitioning from a company like Chegg to a company like ElevenLabs, which is very much taking advantage of the AI wave as part of their core business model?
Yeah, it's pretty night and day in some respect. I mean, I was at Chegg during the time period, and it has certainly become a bit of a poster child when it comes to AI disruption in the last 4 years. And that was a really wild experience being there and being inside of that and feeling how quickly technology waves can shift. And this one more so than a lot of others in the past. But yeah, I was already at Chegg working on a future business bet, right? Coding and skills-based learning and trying to expand beyond just traditional study homework help when ChatGPT launched. And it became very clear from the beginning that students were beginning to turn to ChatGPT to ask questions, to get instant feedback, to get free answers, which really was the core value proposition of Chegg's study product, which was 70-80+% of revenue directly from students. And so you then kind of compound that with a lot of the changes in search and organic search, where Google's beginning to index a lot in AI mode to be able to fulfill answers right on top of the search request. And so you really just felt this wave of disruption that came, and it doesn't care how well prepared or unprepared you are to be able to hit at its core. So yeah, I mean, I think it was a really remarkable time, and knowing that Chegg had already made one platform shift leap and going from physical textbooks to digital kind of SaaS. And I think it just gave me a lot of respect. But at the time, a couple of years ago, as I took a step back and kind of reassessed where I wanted to be in my career, it was definitely a question of, do I want to be on the side of a disruptor or a disrupted? And for me, it really took a bit of a risk at the time to take a step back and go and work on a smaller company. At the time, it was unclear when I joined ElevenLabs if AI voice and AI audio could stand on its own and really build a bigger enduring company. And it's been a great ride at ElevenLabs since.
So let's jump into that. And at this point, ElevenLabs is a pretty big company. It's one of the fastest growing companies in AI. It's been very successful, and we'll get to the consumer apps later, but it started as this horizontal API platform for AI-powered voice. Can you tell the audience, for those who don't already know, what does the core ElevenLabs business and product do? And then what drove the decision at some point to start spinning off these vertical consumer apps on top of that platform?
The core of ElevenLabs, and what I think ElevenLabs is most known for, is having the most lifelike and realistic AI voices. And so this is kind of, in the beginning, your traditional taking text and converting it into speech, and really doing that on the back of AI and transformer-led architecture that allows you to just really embody and get lifelike both voice clones, as well as things like dubbing and a variety of other use cases that really make voice the dynamic kind of use case that it is. That's kind of where ElevenLabs has been. And of course, it has been able to build out from there. So now doing, of course, not only text to speech, but speech to text, sound effects, as well as music models that we all build at the foundational layer. And then beginning to move more and more into a platform play to be able to help you orchestrate voice agents, or to be able to use voice AI inside of your platforms or products as well. I think, from the moment I joined, it was one of the first things I asked, which is, why is ElevenLabs trying to think about building first party, either consumer or creator apps themselves? And, I posed this in the beginning to Monty, our CEO, and he had a really clear way of thinking about this, which is that ultimately our goal and our aspiration is not just to build, great research that underpins a lot of other products and applications, but it is to really build a generational company. And to us, that means one of the requirements is that you also build on top of your own research and breakthroughs, and you build at the product layer, and you build a brand that both B2B and B2C that people know and love. And so from a very early point, it was clear that we wanted to go beyond just being an API that was called upon, and really build great and exceptional products in-house as well.
So let's talk about some of these creator and consumer apps. What are the specific apps that ElevenLabs has built on its platform? And then let's talk a little bit more about ElevenReader, which I know is one of the apps that you've been more involved with.
Yeah, of course. So today we offer two apps, and we have a consumer-focused app, which is the ElevenReader app, which really offers the world's best voice models in a way that brings anything you want to read to life. And so the way I like to describe this product is really if a traditional audiobook is one voice that's recorded to read one book in one language, this is really any voice reading in any language and reading aloud any book that you want to be able to bring to life. And so we think that this is a really kind of a unique opportunity in time to apply voice AI to this type of experience. And then, of course, the other app that we run and that our team builds and grows is the ElevenLabs app. And this is our flagship mobile product. I don't want to call it a companion product to the web because it's growing extremely quickly and can really make use of a lot of the unique parts and attributes of being mobile first. And so it gives you the ability to create voice, video, image, sound effects on your device and to be able to do that in a way that creators are trying to grow and scale an audience on of course platforms like TikTok and Instagram. So between the two apps, though, I think that the commonality is really our view that between being a creator and being a consumer is beginning to blur a little bit, and that you can actually create your own type of audiobook-like experience, or that you can consume voice and video and image in ways that allow you to create new technologies and new media as well.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I feel like a lot more people are becoming creators over the last few years. And I think that will only accelerate, largely because technology is just making it easier, more affordable, and more lucrative than it ever has been before. So let's talk a little bit more about that in the context of ElevenReader specifically. Who are some of the early adopters of ElevenReader, and what sort of content do you find them either bringing to the platform themselves or using on the platform through your ElevenReader marketplace?
Yeah, so the app first launched in summer 2024, and the idea from the beginning was pretty straightforward. It was working backwards from first principles of, well, we have these incredibly powerful AI speech models that are primarily being accessed through an API, but what would it look like to be able to make that available in a consumer experience? And so from the beginning, the one of the first ways that became very clear at ElevenLabs was the use case around audiobooks. And there's a story of Mati and Piat who launched the company, who put up essentially a proof of concept landing page that just had probably a 200 character wide text input box, and it would allow you to convert that amount of text into speech. And they began to get a little bit of traction and saw that there were, rows and rows of entries that were, hundreds of thousands of characters long. Mm-hmm. And when they looked at these specific input fields, they found that they were a lot of times people's own books and manuscripts that they wanted to be able to convert into audiobooks to be able to sell or to be able to distribute or be able to hear themselves. So the beginning, we found really good early product market fit when it comes to the use case of kind of underserved long form audio. And so to me, that often looks like fan fiction or web novels or really any type of long form stories that aren't yet converted into a professional audiobook. And our voice models being kind of fluent and lifelike and highly emotive can really help bridge that gap. And so being able to convert a fan fiction that you might love on the internet into an audiobook for you to be able to play on a commute or be able to play at home was kind of one of the core first ways that we got our foot into the door in this market.
Got it. And so talk to me a little bit more about what some of the unique opportunities and challenges are of building a consumer app like ElevenReader inside a foundational model company like ElevenLabs. I'm sure there are many advantages, but what are some of the challenges that you face as well?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about both. So I think first is I really love it. It's I think of a consumer, and I know we've talked about this, Phil, is a little bit at times like playing on hard mode. But I do think that doing it inside of a foundational model company that's building at the core of speech and audio is a big tailwind that gives our teams just a lot of capabilities and a lot of opportunity to draw upon. I think one thing that's kind of unique about it is the first thing is we're really set up as a series of internal startups. So even though we've grown quite quickly at ElevenLabs. We're still really a series of kind of teams of 6 or 8 people that work on a specific product or on a specific opportunity. And so I think the first thing that we get within that is really, one opportunity is early access to these models and a deeper understanding of kind of their capabilities and edges and frontiers of each one. And also it's nice to have essentially an unlimited budget to be able to throw at these models and be able to really push them to see what type of experiences that we're able to bring into a consumer product experience. So that's one. I think one thing that's kind of unique too is it begins to create some internal flywheels where our internal product development teams are almost some of the most intensive consumers of our APIs and our models. And so there's a really valuable feedback loop in helping to push and provide feedback and to fine tune what we get from an API and be able to improve the experience that you get as a developer, or being able to assess across a wide set of data around adoption, latency. And then, of course, it goes both ways because we can feed that right back into the model. So I think that's one of the ways that we've really been able to use this approach. Well, I think a challenge to call out is it's just, of course, really hard to do a lot of things well. And it's hard to be, fundamentally a horizontal company that builds a lot of products on top of a wide set of research that's doing everything from a consumer apps to partnering with some of the biggest enterprises in the world. And I think it takes a deliberate amount of focus and the right culture to really get that right. But I'd expect more and more foundational model companies to be building products, being able to adopt to consumers. I mean, you're already seeing this, right, with Claude, that's taking Claude code and adapting it into kind of a Claude co-work experience to be able to make it even more accessible to consumers, or even with ChatGPT Health, which is kind of a dedicated area to be able to get at health data, which is built on top of acquired startups, right? So I think it's unclear if that's going to stay with code red mode, but I think the opportunity to have a lot of these flywheels and fulfilling loops inside of a foundational company, I think, has been a big opportunity for us.
This episode is brought to you by Paddle. Today's fastest growing apps are multi-channel. They use web monetization to reach new audiences, improve attribution, and boost margins. But selling on the web gets complicated fast. Managing currencies, taxes, fraud, and disputes gets increasingly difficult as companies scale. Paddle solves this. As the merchant of record for thousands of apps, including Runna, GoodNotes, Codeway, and HubX, they take on the complexity of web monetization so you can focus on growing your business. Learn more at paddle.com/subversive. Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned a couple of the examples of vertical apps that labs like OpenAI and Anthropic have built. But it makes sense that you guys are sort of dog fooding your own API product through these consumer and creator apps as well. And so there's this feedback loop where your own developers internally are some of the largest users of your API. And so as they run into issues, that creates opportunities for you to improve the horizontal platform part of the product. But then also, as you push the envelope on what your creator and consumer apps can do, it informs new opportunities for how the APIs themselves can be pushed forward and advanced. What are some of the specific ways that ElevenReader is using the advantage of being within ElevenLabs to compete against incumbents like Audible and Speechify? And I know in some cases you compete directly with those companies and in some cases you don't, but how are you finding ways to gain an edge based on your affiliation with ElevenLabs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in the very early stages when it comes to this work, but the good news is that the audio market is beginning to boom right now when it comes to consumers. I think we've really leaned into the fact, of course, that we build these models in-house and that we have kind of fine-tuned control over the way that they perform. And I think that allows us to offer them at lower cost or be able to reach across a lot more languages and geographies than we might on our own. So I think that's one opportunity around kind of the size and the scope of the market that we're able to meet and address. And then, yeah, I think we were just talking about this kind of compounding effect where you start to be able to get, if your goal is to be able to voice the most lifelike and responsive kind of AI doctor's office receptionist that needs to be able to relate to a patient on the phone, or if you're creating a voice tutor that's used by Duolingo or by Masterclass, that same kind of breakthroughs that you get in that specific moment can also come back to be able to help you inform kind of the voice and tone that can be applied to read a bedtime story. And so I think the realness and kind of the naturalness of that voice experience can really be extended across a variety of uses.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I was talking to Ann Burdetsky at NEA, who I think you know because NEA is obviously an investor in ElevenLabs, and she was telling me how audiobooks are probably going to evolve almost into a new medium over the next few years, because you're going from a world where you have one or a small set of professional voice actors who are reading these titles to a world where you could have multiple voices, multiple tones. You almost create this immersive space that the story is taking place in. And so it sort of sits in between traditional audiobooks and then like full scale theater movies, right? And so how do you think that will impact how people consume content over the next few years?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I just got back from a conference a couple of weeks ago where we were doing work with one of the big 5 publishers that are really trying to think about this and are trying to explore how is AI going to evolve the way that they tell stories or be able to distribute them. I think there's a couple of opportunities there that you named. So one is kind of the amount of choice that it lends to the type of experience that you want to hear. And the way I think of it is you could almost think of like a dial of how much do you want to dial up the multicast or soundscapes or sound effects that are really piped in to become much more of a cinematic experience, or to what extent do you want to read a research paper aloud as you prepare for a graduate school exams, and that might not be the type of experience that you want. And I think that there's always still going to be space for, on the very highest end, right, the finest voice acting that can bring stories to life in a really human way. But I think the big opportunity, of course, when it comes to audiobooks is just the pure scale. If you think of a percentage of ebooks that get converted or recorded into audiobooks is sub 5%. And it's extremely low as you kind of look at the long tail of markets and geographies around the globe. So I think there's going to be 2 effects going on. One is going to be able to extend that use across a very long tail of texts and books that aren't in audio today. And then, of course, kind of this choice piece of being able to redefine the way that work sounds and is heard. And of course, to be able to get there, there's still a lot when it comes to rights and copyright and a variety of needs to be able to navigate. But I think at the end of the day, the use case is going to ultimately flow towards a consumer and the way that they want to be able to experience that story and that content.
Yeah, I mean, what's so powerful about ElevenLabs is just how flexible the platform is, and the use cases are endless. So now that we sort of painted the picture of where ElevenLabs is going and where apps like ElevenReader built on top of ElevenLabs can go, let's get a little bit more tactical. So let's go back to, it was May 2024 when you all initially launched ElevenReader. What did your launch strategy look like when you were just getting it off the ground?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we've done at ElevenLabs is we've really tried to build and embrace this kind of launch focus culture. And so we really build around these launch moments and create a bunch of media and a bunch of hype around that specific point in time. And so the beginning was pretty straightforward. We leaned really, really heavily into viral and organic growth. It's just right before I joined. And when I joined, the core of our work on the app was to continue to drive word of mouth through Reddit, Discord. And as time went on, we kind of have grown from a team of 4 developers and 1 designer to now kind of a much more fully formed team to be able to drive not only across organic, but also supply-led growth or partner growth, as well as beginning to layer in a bit of paid as well. But from the beginning, it was really, a bet on let's ship a product and see what the response will be and really go from that point forward.
which is pretty typical for consumer apps. So what I heard you say is you started with some of these grassroots platforms like Reddit and Discord and just allowed the initial product to speak for itself, get some early traction, find some pockets of early adopters. And then as that started to take hold, you were able to invest in a slightly larger team. You were also able to invest in some paid acquisition channels. So which paid channels have been most important for accelerating ElevenReader's trajectory?
Yeah, and I think one other thing that I would just add to that is that we also had a unique opportunity where we launched the ElevenReader app before we had launched an ElevenLabs app, and so there was a time period where there were a lot of people that were searching and interested in ElevenLabs text to speech, and we're finding this audio story app, and we're quite confused in the beginning stages, and honestly part of what we did in being able to build out an ElevenLabs app was to really get pulled into that demand to be able to meet what do a text-to-speech consumer want compared to a text-to-speech creator. And so I think that had also been a really important part in time for us too. When it comes to paid, we really view it as a way to be able to layer on top of or to be able to amplify the work that we're already doing when it comes to brand and organic growth. So I think, yes, it's got a bunch of unique attributes that allow you to go out and bid to be able to reach audiences that you might not be otherwise able to tap into. And I think that that's been true for us when we're building inside of an AI lab, and then also trying to go out to be able to attract a consumer that might be interested in romance or fiction or fanfic audiobooks. And so I think that that's kind of been a unique case. We also, of course, there's for those that haven't spent as much time, there's massive communities of Book Talk and Bookstagram, and there's a lot of latent demand and conversations that are going on across these platforms. And so we've really tried to use both on paid as well as influencer, trying to lead with more of a UGC approach than what you might otherwise see from an AI lab to be able to connect with this type of consumer. And that's been really key in the beginning stages.
Yeah, I was talking to Paul Warren, who's the founder of Margins, earlier this year, and he was telling me about how important TikTok was for their launch strategy and for continuing to grow their app. And it sounds like you've been able to tap into a lot of that same passion that exists among avid readers, both offline, but now increasingly through these audiobooks. You've also talked a little bit with me about partnerships that you've done with celebrities like Melania Trump, for example. How has that fit into your user acquisition and expansion strategy?
Yeah, so that was, of course, one of our more, what I would say is quite a unique and a bit of a controversial launch for obvious reasons. But I think, what we saw in that opportunity, which was her team was very committed to making her ebook content widely available in a bunch of languages and in audio. And so it's fairly unique. Now you can play her ebook aloud in her voice that's now being read aloud in Portuguese and Spanish and English and Hindi. And so content or personal feelings aside about anything, it was really just a unique, probably a first of its kind partnership in the audiobook space to be able to bring a story to life in that way. And I think more widely, our approach beyond that specific partnership, and we now have a variety of icons on the platform like Michael Caine or Maya Angelou or the voice of Judy Garland, who are all on the platform now. And I think that it's from a core belief of ours that reading and that voice is really a personal and an intimate experience, that the way that you relate to a voice that you've heard from, say, a young age is really important, and that we view these kind of partnerships with iconic voices as being part of that. And we've really brought these voices through exclusive partnerships where we're fairly compensating and in partnership with either their estate or their team to be able to bring that voice and that tone to really create a unique consumer experience, and one that seems to be really impactful and core to what we're doing when it comes to reading aloud. So we really want to bridge the two, which is telling the great stories, but also pairing them with these iconic voices that you can only now get as a result of our technology, and hearing a story told in a voice that you might not have imagined before has been a pretty unique part of our growth at ElevenLabs.
Yeah, it's very compelling. And I'm curious with your partnership strategy, how much of it is opportunistic, where you just happen to have an icon who wants to work with ElevenLabs reach out, or you reach out to them, versus more strategic, where there are particular pockets of users or audiences that you want to attract to the platform, and so you're then reaching out to a set of icons who you know can tap into that user group?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, there's certainly a lot of interest in being able to produce high fidelity and professional voice clones that we might support, but we might not always bring onto our platform as kind of an iconic voice, or to be able to lend. We've launched an iconic voice marketplace to connect brands and advertisers to be able to use these voice tones in a really secure and partnered way. We've also taken the opportunity to look at where we see the greatest needs and opportunity, right? So one good example is we have a very large base of consumers in Poland, because our two co-founders and a large share of our team are from Poland. We have really deep roots there, and so we had an exclusive partnership with the voice of kind of Polish film, Peter Franceski, who has voiced, the Harry Potter audiobooks in Poland, and he's now a voice tone that you can read aloud with inside of Poland and inside of the Polish language. And that one voice, of course, on ElevenReader is kind of shot to the top of the charts when it comes to that set of consumers. So we just think that this idea that voice is such a core and intimate part of the experience that you get when you're hearing a story, and this kind of really unique opportunity to be able to pair voices with stories has been both opportunistic as well as kind of cultivated in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm so glad you brought up Harry Potter, because I have two daughters who are 8 and 6, and I've been reading the books to them multiple times. And, it's funny. It's like when you're a kid and you read Harry Potter, you have this version of it in your mind, and then you go watch the movies and it doesn't always jive with what you had in your head. I think a lot of people have felt like maybe the Harry Potter movies didn't do the books justice. But audio is nice because, especially with a tool like ElevenLabs, you can tailor the voices to reflect the reality that you want to create. But then it also leaves enough up to the imagination that exists in this sort of nice middle ground in between. Let's talk a little bit more about monetization, because AI is changing the ways consumer apps monetize their subscriptions or their products more broadly in pretty profound ways, for a variety of reasons. But one of the most important ones being the marginal cost of serving a subscriber used to be zero or close to zero. Whereas now, with underlying compute costs from LLMs, it's become non-trivial. And so how have you and your team thought about ElevenReader's monetization strategy in a context where serving a marginal subscriber, especially one that's using the product very heavily, can be pretty significant?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, and one that we, deal with and have had to deal with from the beginning, because, 100% of our products and our platform, our service are built on top of compute and are built on top of tokens. And as those costs continue to come down, it does allow greater kind of flexibility to be able to meet that demand. But I think that compared to prior costs, like at Chegg, of course, or at Quizlet, if you wanted to create, hundreds and thousands of flashcard sets, and that's going to have a real material upfront cost. So yeah, I think, one thing I would call out specifically for our case is the way that we've monetized between two apps that we run, right? So if you're on the ElevenLabs app, of course, you're already in the mindset of creating AI media. You kind of get the idea now that there's a certain amount of credits or tokens that you'd be able to get to be able to create that. If you're vibe coding or if you're creating text to speech, right? You kind of understand that that's a currency that's being used now. And then I think if I compare that to ElevenReader, and if you're, say, a stay-at-home mom or dad, and you want to play fan fiction at night to be able to fall asleep, and you might not be thinking about how many credits or how many tokens this is going to cost me to be able to play aloud, right? You just want to be able to experience that story in rich and flawless audio.
So one of the things I think I heard you say there is you have the ElevenLabs creator app and the ElevenReader consumer app. For a creator app, prosumers in general are a little bit more used to more complicated monetization models. Could be a subscription, could be a usage-based or a value-based model, could be a hybrid model where you pay a base subscription price, but then you pay for additional credits on top of that. Whereas in pure consumer land, consumers tend to be a little bit more resistant to complexity. And they've been trained by some of the largest and most popular consumer apps like Netflix or Spotify or Duolingo, that where they're just going to pay a simple monthly or annual subscription and that's it. And so what I hear you saying is both of these apps are using the underlying ElevenLabs API, which has costs associated with it. But you've taken two different approaches in how you're monetizing the creator app versus the consumer app to reflect what the end user expects and is aware of. And so can you go into a little bit more detail around what does the monetization model look like for the creator app versus the consumer app?
Yeah, so I think on the creator app side, the way that we think about it at ElevenLabs is we now have, I think, 5 tiers that allow you to subscribe at the amount of access that you want to be able to produce with, right? And so that can range from as low as $5 a month and then scales straight upward from there. We've tried to really find a nice middle ground with that when it comes to the creator app as well, because you are inside of the App Store and the Play Store a little bit more tied to the specific mechanics of IAPs and subscriptions and upgrades that kind of need to flow in a specific way and don't always give you the same amount of flexibility that you get when you charge on the web. So we've tried to take a very clean approach there and have built really around one core subscription and then a pay-as-you-go model that we're beginning to roll out as well. So again, I think as soon as you're in either consumer or creator spaces, just being super clear about the specific way that you're monetizing is important. And then on the flip side, what we see out of the ElevenReader app, of course, is really just 2 plans, and it's very straightforward here. We've been able to build a very robust free plan that allows you still the same great AI voices. So we don't downgrade your voice experience. I think that's important to us because we do want to make sure that the greatest voice experience that you can have is going to be available on a free plan. And that's kind of a unique take compared to a lot of others in the space. And then we've had to evolve our way into paid plans where today we offer one kind of full unlimited plan that allows you to be able to consume up to 24 hours a day. And, that I think has changed the way that we think about monetization a great deal. I think at the end of the day, you have to start with what a consumer is going to want to subscribe to and work backwards instead of trying to ship your own view of the way that they should subscribe.
Okay, so you've talked through how the pricing for prosumers versus consumers looks different, and the reason for keeping the ElevenReader consumer app monetization model much simpler than the creator model. Let's also talk a little bit about the evolution you took to get there, right? Like you've experimented with multiple approaches for the ElevenReader app that got you to this much more simplistic outcome. And then also, let's talk a little bit about web versus mobile and why you've chosen to keep pricing models on mobile a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, so in the beginning, we took what was really a 3-step approach to being able to price on our consumer app, right? So we thought a little bit about, having a robust free tier that would continue to drive growth and really fulfill a core need there for those who want it. We thought about a mid-tier price, call it what can you get between $5 and $10 a month. And then of course that there's a larger group that wants to play, entire books one day at a time or 10 or 12 hours a day to be able to consume audio. And so across this wide span of consumers, where's the right space to be able to create plans that both leave a good bit of value on the table for consumers to enjoy and allow us to be able to monetize. What we learned over time, though, both quantitatively through testing and going live to market, as well as qualitatively, and going deep in kind of interviews and really understanding the way that these plans are conceived of and viewed, was just that consumers tend to view pricing much more in a binary way of either, free or paid, or
Mhm.
little or expansive, right? And it's not necessarily rooted in what they say they might want or need, but it's much more comparative to what they
Mhm.
might expect from other paid applications, right? So Spotify or Netflix, if you're kind of in the realm of media, those might be the pure apps that you're compared to, right? So over time, what we've done is have just have made a lot of moves to be able to readjust and repackage, but have primarily collapsed the paid plans into one. So today we offer even more expansive free plan that hundreds of thousands of people love and use, but also one kind of ultra plan that gives you unlimited time of text to speech. And one of the advantages that I think that we've had over time is that time yields more data. And so you can just look at the way that these consumption patterns age and grow over time and get smarter about where you kind of price and package. And ultimately we found that binary distinction between paying for full access and complete access was a much stronger value proposition than trying to pay at certain tiers when you think of this specific product.
That makes a lot of sense. And then how have you thought about monetization on web versus mobile? It sounds like on mobile, you've kept things simpler than on web. What was the rationale for that? How much of it was based on consumer psychology versus just operating within the constraints of what the app stores allow you to do?
This has to do on the ElevenLabs app, where the ElevenLabs web plans are really expansive. So I think we now offer somewhere upwards of 6 plans that start at $5 that might go all the way up to a couple $1,000s, that are really built around a prosumer use case and then a small to mid-sized business use case. A lot of it is the majority of it is based on some of the constraints that you get inside of these platforms and IAPs, and the way that they can or do stack together or not, or the way that they do or do not sync to what you provide on the web, right? So downgrades, discounts, and expirations, and keeping all your plans in sync across, Google, Apple, and or Stripe, is a really challenging thing to do, and I think that that's part of it, but I also think part of it too is that when you're on a mobile device, we are, I think, as consumers, and if you're in a creator mindset or not, you're still viewing pricing and packaging through the lens of a very small interface, and so I think that a lot of times makes a lot more sense to be more opinionated and more clear about what you offer. And in this case for us, it means having a smaller footprint when it comes to the plans that we do offer.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. It's both the smaller form factor, but it's also people are typically on the go when they're on their mobile devices. And that may mean they have less time to make a decision. They may be multitasking. And so I've found over and over again that simplicity is just so important when you're a consumer app operating on a mobile device. Well, this has been a great conversation, as I knew it would be. Let's jump into our lightning round. I'm just going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. You can give me quick 1-minute responses. What's the best part about working at ElevenLabs, and what's one thing that you would change?
I think the way I would put the best part about ElevenLabs is that the space between idea and execution is really small. And it's that if you have a great idea and a great insight or a test that you want to run, you're expected to have that shipped the same day. I think on the Sub Club podcast, I call us like a series of speedboats. And that's really the way that we operate, are these small teams that move extremely fast, that are tight knit, that have really high talent density. And the combination of those things really just allows our teams to perform and to move really quickly. And as someone who got into this work to be able to build and grow and create new things, I think that's an incredibly fulfilling part of what we do. I think there's not much that I would change. I mean that honestly, but I do think that in going from, I think as I shared single product into multi-product. There's definitely times where at that speed there can be a lack of coherence at times between these small teams, and kind of the overall connection between them that can be hard to coordinate, or can be hard to kind of make work. But I think when I take a step back, it's just truly a remarkable place to be able to work and to be able to build at.
Yeah, well, it's certainly what I've heard is that ElevenLabs is a fantastic culture, and really a builder's culture. It's attracted a lot of entrepreneurs and people who want to move fast and break things and build things. And obviously, anytime you're in an environment like that, it does create a little bit of chaos. But it sounds like one of the things you've done from very early on in the company's history is create these sort of small SWAT teams that can operate more or less autonomously, which just allows you to move fast without creating a lot of coordination cost. To go to a more lighthearted place, what is the funniest combination of voice and content you've ever seen on ElevenReader?
So this one is a little bit different than a pure voice content combination, but I'll share this with you because I think it's fun. So one is a lot like language models. Voice models can also hallucinate, and they can degrade as far as audio quality, or morph the sounds or volume, or they might even inject certain inferred sounds during a non-character space of space, or a period, and it might not even be seen by a user, but can spur some pretty wild sounds. So we, of course, have an iconic voice on the platform of Burt Reynolds, this grizzled, iconic American, male voice. And there was a period at the beginning of last year where Burt's voice specifically would degrade and hallucinate after very long amounts of session time. And so we had some wild and hilarious examples of the voice of Bert kind of morphing into this almost demonic sounding demon voice that would only come into play after you've already been playing, half an hour or more of a piece of content. And so we saw some clips go viral on that in our communities, and we've worked really hard to keep the demons at bay since then.
I mean, it's an example of all publicity is good publicity, right? You wouldn't necessarily think a demonic Burt Reynolds voice would be a good thing, but it sounds like it got a lot of attention on social media, and it shows off the power of what a platform like this can do, even in the context of a hallucination. What sort of content do you like to listen to on ElevenReader, and when do you listen to it?
Right now, I'm halfway into The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway, which is being read to me uniquely by Michael Caine, which is a pretty great experience, and just wild to hear those two words. I also really love, like a lot of people, we've got a very big use case around playing longer form blog posts or longer form articles. So we've done some work with Packy McCormick, who writes great in-depth long form articles, or of course, Paul Graham kind of stories and essays are great to be able to spend more time on because they're so long. And yeah, we have a very, very active golden retriever. So I end up doing a lot of long walks and hikes, and I tend to play a lot of my content in that free time.
Yeah, it is one of the wonderful things about audiobooks is that you can do it outside, you can do it in the car, you can do it on the go. And especially as a busy professional with 2 kids, I find myself doing a lot more listening than reading these days. What's one growth tactic we haven't already talked about that's worked surprisingly well for ElevenReader?
I'd say one that's not flashy is just continuing to optimize our trial experiences. And so really creating a cohesive experience from onboarding through trial offer. And, a lot of that has been against conventional wisdom. There's a lot out there on the right way to be able to monetize, or the benchmarks, or, doing a 1-week reverse trial to really get engagement before an offer. And I've been surprised by as many things that I've had to unlearn or have surprised me in our trial experiences as those that have been confirmed. And so I think that that's one that we're constantly playing with, constantly trying to improve, constantly trying to build upon and iterate. That's delivered a lot of compounding wins for us.
Yeah, I mean, onboarding is just so important, and you got to think about it from first principles, and you can't just copy paste what's working for other apps. And so it sounds like in the case of ElevenLabs and ElevenReader, just shrinking that onboarding experience and getting the user directly into the product experience has sort of spoken for itself and has worked really well for you guys. Last question is just, what's another consumer app that you think is doing an exceptional job of leveraging AI to create new and compelling experiences for consumers?
Yeah, so I think one that we really admire, and this I think is a bit of a consensus pick currently, is Whisperflow, and not just because we love AI audio, but also when we just hit on kind of onboarding and trial experience, I think that they've taken a very technical and complex onboarding experience, like having to interact with system settings and custom keyboards and audio channels is not a very intuitive thing. So I think that that's one that I really admire. There's a couple others. One called Quarter that's in the finance world and kind of bridges the gap between institutional kind of knowledge and insights and transcripts, earnings calls that I think is really interesting and doing some unique things. And then I know that you love chess, Phil, and I'm trying to improve and learn. And chess.com uses ElevenLabs too to have you be able to interact with a voice kind of chess tutor. And so those are some of the things that I'm kind of viewing as like reimagining the way that you think about consumer interaction. And all three of them have some element of voice in them too.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you brought up Whisperflow in particular. I've done a little bit of work with Tanai and the team there as well. And the stuff that they've done on the onboarding experience is exceptional. I mean, they've just taken this very technical product and made it fun and whimsical and so inviting to new users, some of whom are engineers and highly technical professionals, but many of whom may be using voice to text transcription service for the first time. And so it really just leaves such a positive first impression in people's minds. And it's not a particularly easy product to do that with, but they've been so creative in how they've approached it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Jack. This has been such a delight, as I knew it would be. Anything you want to leave our audience with before we sign off here?
No, thanks, Phil. It's been fun. I just say to give our apps a try. We'd love to hear, we'd love to hear your feedback. And we're hiring and growing for exceptional growth marketers, for iOS developers, for designers. And so if you're really into these themes and want to be able to help build at the forefront of AI and audio, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great team and a great company. Thanks again, Jack. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks again to RevenueCat for sponsoring this episode. If you're building a subscription app, you can use RevenueCat to power purchases, optimize paywalls, offer discounts, handle refunds, manage customer data, run A/B tests, generate insights, and unlock more revenue. I work with dozens of subscription apps, and most of them are already using RevenueCat to power their businesses. Learn more at revenuecat.com/subversive.